Welcome to the slide package on monetarism. And before I start, let me just quickly remind you on why or and when did it emerge. It, if you remember the overview on paradigms, I already told you that in the 1970s we had a re-emergence of neoclassical ideas, and that came in two versions, so to say. One was monetarism, and the other the more extreme version of the school of rational expectations. Why during the 1970s? First, as we discussed, there has been growing theoretical criticism on this idea of combining Keynesian ideas in form of the ISLM model with a neoclassical supply function in the model of the neoclassical synthesis. So it was just by the construction of the model, it proved to be unstable and not really convincing. Plus, we also had empirical developments, so economic developments that seemed to put a lot of questions on the Keynesian ideas that you should rather allow more inflation in order to fight unemployment. Why that? Well, the 1970s were characterized by stagflation, that is a combination of high inflation and low growth, and therefore high unemployment. So the feeling was, if that would work to allow for higher inflation in order to get lower unemployment, then we shouldn't end up in this stagflation issues. So what did both kind of schools stress? Both tried to re-establish the old neoclassical ideas where the focus is the government cannot and should not stabilize the economy, in contrast to Keynesian ideas. I will in this package of slides only explain or first focus on monetarism, and the other package is then explaining the school of rational expectations. Both became influential and left their marks on then later used models. Okay, how will I present them? Well, I will first provide you with the main ideas of monetarist and then go into specificities like the quantity theory of money, the natural rate of unemployment, the Phillips curve that became very prominent by then, time lags of fiscal policy, and then come to general economic policy recommendations based on monetarists' ideas, and then sum up. Okay, so what do monetarists believe in? They believe in the market economy being inherently stable and adjusting flexibly to exogenous shocks. According to monetarists, inflation is always caused by too high money supply, so the central bank is a culprit. If we observe inflation, it's a purely monetary phenomenon, and it's due to the central bank having printed too much money. And they stick to this idea of the neoclassicals that money is neutral. So if we change the money supply, it will not have real effects. Yet monetarists are not as radical as the school of rational expectations. And monetarists would admit that in the short run, if prices and wages are sticky, then it can have effects, but they are only temporary. And in the long run, the problem is that these short-run effects go away and we are stuck with higher inflation. And if the central bank really tries to use this mechanism, then the central bank will cause instability also in real money incomes. So it will contribute to business cycle fluctuations. Okay, so how do they interpret the quantity theory of money? So very similar to neoclassicals, they would say money demand is basically stable. The velocity of money demand is stable in the long run, and y is determined by real variables. Yet they kind of take Keynesian criticism earnest, and they really try to react on it. And they say, yes, Keynes is right. Of course, money demand is a function of income and the interest rate and expectations and even on taste. Yet they would say it's not so volatile as Keynes has stressed, because it's not really depending on actual income, but really on permanent income. So the income level you expect to have over your life cycle. So just because your income increases, you will not directly demand a higher real money. Instead, you would factor in if that is just a temporary increase in your income level. If you consider it to be temporary, then it will not change your money demand. So that is how they kind of take up Keynesian arguments, but at the same time then come back to the old neoclassical ideas to say real money demand is stable, and this is due to money demand not reacting to temporary fluctuations in income, but to the permanent income level. Plus, they also say, in addition, money demand is not reacting to just one interest rate, so not just to the one of the central bank, but of course investors always have all the different interest rate levels and returns on financial assets in mind, and that then makes sure that even if the central bank is increasing or decreasing the central bank's rate, you would not directly see a reaction to that, only if it's really affecting the entire return level. And what is really different for monetarists, expectations play a more important role, and therefore also expectations about inflation. So the PE stands for inflation expectations, and of course taste and preferences, as with the neoclassicals, would play a role. Okay. Of course, they do allow for a short run effect. So we do have the problem that once money supply changes and is then higher or lower than money demand, then this will have then to feed in through all prices. So temporarily you may have changes in relative prices, and therefore you may also get then real effects. Just to say another word on the permanent income hypothesis, I already said that consumption of private households is not driven by current income, but instead by permanent income. So that also explains why we do not have these nice multiplier effects running, because if people consider that income is just temporarily higher than they expect it to be over their entire life stream, they would not directly react to it and buy more. Instead, they would stick to their old consumption habits. And Milton Friedman, as an avid empirical economist, also looked at consumption demand, and it's indeed rather stable over time. So we do have consumption habits, and we stick to them. Of course, the permanent or income generally does not only refer to wage income, but also to capital income, so yields from wealth, and therefore it is also supposed to be more stable. So even if there's a shock hitting the economy and temporarily you earn less, you can partly compensate this lower wage income by stable capital income. That's one of the ideas. That's why permanent income is considered to be way more stable. You always look at also the future income streams that we're having, and therefore your consumption reaction is also very stable, as you would not react to small temporary changes in current wage income. As I already said, Milton Friedman is like the most famous representative of monetarism, and he received the Nobel Prize for his achievements in the fields of consumption analysis, monetary history and theory, and for his demonstration of the complexity of stabilization policies. So he was not only looking at how did central banks behave in the past, and they mainly concentrated on the Great Depression and how central banks reacted to that, and how far they did not react in an optimal manner, and even furthered the crisis. He also engaged in monetary theory, and also in general setup or criticism on stabilization policies. Something he really promoted is the idea of a natural unemployment rate. What does it mean? First, in his own words, the level that would be grounded out by the Walrasian system of general equilibrium equations, provided there is embedded in them the actual structural characteristics of the labor and commodity markets, including market imperfections, stochastic variability in demands and supplies, the cost of gathering information about job vacancies and labor availabilities, the cost of mobility, and so on. So why is that important, and why did it become so famous, this idea? Well, the idea is that every country has something like a natural unemployment rate. So one that exists permanently, and even at the peak of a business cycle or a downturn, well, in a downturn definitely it increases, but even in a peak, the unemployment rate will not fully go away, because you always have some reasons why some people are unemployed in the economy. So the main idea is that there's something like structural unemployment in every economy, partly due to frictional unemployment, just search unemployment. So imagine you lose your job unexpectedly, then you have to find a new one. Of course, you normally do not find one directly the next day. Instead, you have to prepare for job interviews, and it will then take some time until you really sign the new contract. So you have these frictions from leaving one job or being fired until then starting the new job. So this adds to always some level of unemployment. Then we also have mismatch unemployment. We have a regional mismatch. You may have observed that unemployment rates in Berlin and in Eastern Germany in general, especially in the northeastern part, are way higher than in the southwest part of Germany. And according to migration theories, if people were fully rational, they would just migrate from northeast Germany to the southwest of Germany in order to find a job there. But people are many times bound to their region, they have their families there, so we many times observe that even though jobs are even better paid in the southwest, people rather prefer to stay unemployed in Berlin or in regions around Berlin instead of really migrating to the regions where they would find a job and even a better paid one. Another thing is skills mismatch. So even though we have a lot of job offers for engineering jobs and for IT jobs, nevertheless we still have more students studying language classes or studying maybe business and economics, well, even more business than economics. So even though this is known to many students, they do not make sure that they get the skills that are needed on the market. And yeah, to some extent, or you can also only forecast them to a limited extent, because of course, we also in the past had the problem that once we had a high demand for certain qualifications, and then too many students started to train these skills, then a lot of them ended up being unemployed. For example, we had the issue that we had a period when we were lacking high school teachers, and then a lot of students started to train high school teaching, and then a lot of them didn't get a job. But we also, of course, can have just mismatches in wage offer and demand. So just the problem that nominal wage levels might be too high in a certain sector, and so people, just due to the too high nominal wages, do not all find a job. Then this would be involuntary unemployment. But we also, of course, have voluntary unemployment. People just saying, well, at this current real wage rate, I prefer to rather enjoy my leisure time. Of course, these structural imperfections and the structural unemployment rate will be the higher imperfections in the labor and the good market. So the less flexible nominal wages will react to demand and supply inequalities, then the more you will have structural unemployment. And of course, you can only have very slowly reacting nominal wages in case you do have, for example, unemployment insurance, minimum wages set by the government, or a strong influence on unions keeping wage level high, and labor institutions that make it very difficult to hire and fire people as the company is needing it. So monetarists would then claim, of course, the more you try to make this market a perfect market, the more you allow wages to react instantaneously to changes in demand and supply, the more you allow the market forces to work, the less you have institutions that try to stabilize nominal wage levels, the better. Yet, monetarists had to somehow say something on empirical findings by Phillips that seemed to stress the Keynesian idea. The economist Phillips published in 1958 a paper that showed a negative relationship between the nominal wage developments and the unemployment rate. As you can see, it seems to be an inverse curve. And that seemed to stress the Keynesian point that rather allow a little bit more of inflation, here in this case wage inflation, than allowing for higher unemployment. And you can directly use this graph and relate it to price inflation. So in the original Phillips curve, it was only related to wage inflation, but wage developments and price developments in most economies are extremely correlated. So that's why you can easily draw a similar picture, just relating unemployment rates to price level developments, to inflation rates, and you then get this negative relationship between inflation and the unemployment rate. And that empirical findings for the UK seem to stress Keynes' point. Well, how did they direct to that, and especially Milton Friedman? What did he say? Well, he said, yes, this might look like something you can exploit as a politician, but you can only do so in the short term. And this is the blue line. So that would be the Phillips curve relationship, that in the short term you have a negative relationship between unemployment and the inflation rate. Milton Friedman stressed that in the long run you are stuck at the long-term vertical Phillips curve that is just representing the natural level of unemployment. What is his idea? Well, his idea is that, of course, imagine we start in point A. So we have a low inflation level, something above 0%, and we are stuck at the unemployed rate that is natural for this economy. Now, if the central bank believes in Keynesian ideas and starts to increase prices, we go up on that dark blue line to the left. Why that? Well, the idea is if nominal wages are sticky, be it due to strong unions, be it due to very long nominal wage contracts, so just by habit or by labor market institutions, then the effect of increasing price levels would be to decrease in the real wage. And of course, companies are seen as the more rational and clever part of the economy. So the private agents running a company would directly realize, oh, real wages went down due to the higher inflation rate promoted by the central bank. Perfect, then I can hire more people because labor costs in relative terms went down. So they hire more people. Workers are not as clever. They lack. So one potential explanation is that they lack, or they suffer from money illusion, as we call it. So they only see that they still get the same nominal wage per hour and have the feeling, oh, perfect, I take the job. And it takes them some time to realize that the same nominal wage can now buy less food and can now pay less the rent and other expenditures in life that they have. So due to this money illusion, they just look at the nominal figures. They need more time to realize, oh, my nominal wage is no longer having the same purchasing power that it had at the start of the year. The other explanation is that even if they notice they are stuck with nominal contracts running a certain longer period that is determined by labor market institutions, by wage bargaining between the association of the employers and unions. So whatever the reason, workers will just accept to be hired and working for decreasing real wages, and this is exploited by the companies who then hire more people. Yet, as soon as, I'm sorry, this was the wrong direction. As soon as workers realize that they really have to do something and really to renegotiate, and once there is a new wage bargaining round, and then the workers bargain for higher nominal wages that cover the inflation, we directly go back to the old unemployment rate, because then companies will directly fire or will no longer hire that many people, and we are then in point C, where we have the same unemployment rate, the natural rate that is structurally given for the country, yet at a higher inflation rate. So the message is, the message by Milton Friedman, of course in the short run it may look as if the central bank can exploit this negative relationship, but only at the cost of higher inflation. And it's just a short run phenomenon that as soon as we have new wage bargaining for a higher nominal wage that will cover for this inflation, we will be back at the old natural rate of unemployment. So if we then wanted again to decrease unemployment, the central bank would have to additionally increase the inflation rate, again above a level above the current level. So we would then move along the red curve upwards, and again it would only be a temporary thing. Sooner or later we would have a new bargaining round for higher nominal wages, and then we would be stuck again at the natural rate of unemployment. So if the central bank really then tries to use this negative short-term relationship, they can only do so at period after period, increasing inflation, really increasing inflation levels in that economy, but in the end of the day they are nevertheless stuck at the natural rate of unemployment. So it's not really helping the economy, it's just a very temporary phenomenon, and it comes at the cost of increasing inflation. So here's just a summary in words. In the short run, we have something that looks like this original Phillips curve. Because workers have money illusion, they do not notice that high inflation lowers the real wage, and nominal wages are rigid due to wage contracts and other institutional peculiarities. But sooner or later they observe that their real wages and therefore their purchasing power have fallen with high inflation. Hence the workers will then bargain for higher nominal wages, and the nice effect that in the meantime employers then hired more workers will then be will just be compensated. So in the long run we are back at the natural unemployment rate, and we did not really gain something. Instead we are left with higher inflation. Okay, so the problem is also that once you then, if you did that in the past and then you want to bring inflation rates down, it is extremely costly. Why? Imagine we are now in this upper point A, and the central bank really tries to convince everyone in the economy that they want to bring inflation down. Well, if people got used to the higher level of inflation, that also implies they made wage contracts that cover for this high inflation level. So if the central bank now decreases money supply and therefore decreases inflation rate in this economy, then we have the opposite thing, or the opposite problem: real wages go up. And that will immediately make sure that many people will lose their jobs. So the unemployment rate will increase above the natural level, until a point B where so many people lost their jobs and so many people were fired or are only allowed to work part-time even though they would like to work full-time, that workers accept in a new wage bargaining round nominal wage cuts. And only when this is the case, we will then come back to a justified level of real wages, and we go back to point C, where we then again are at the natural rate of unemployment. But as you can see, in order to get back to lower inflation levels, there's a period where the central bank will have to create unemployment above the natural rate, which implies that it's very costly for society. Many people lose their jobs or cannot work as many hours as they want to, and in most economies we have the problem that unemployment has hysteresis effects, so it's not just a temporary thing. So that should have told you that monetary policy is a bad idea. If Milton Friedman is right, it's only having short-run effects, but at the cost of increasing inflation. And if you then later on want to get rid of inflation, you really have to create unemployment. So what about fiscal policy? This is neither effective. Why that? Milton Friedman's main idea is look at what time it takes until fiscal policy becomes effective. Why is he stressing the time effect? Well, he says, well,